Okay. Well, again, welcome everyone. I hope you enjoyed your week off last week. We didn't have class, so now I know you're ready and excited. You've been longing for this workshop, I know, for 14 days now. Been wishing for this. So I'm now able to start and answer your prayers to be together and do some study. Poetry. I know that's been keeping you up every night waiting for this class. So welcome. We're going to be focusing on a topic that we haven't spent a lot of time on in the modules while I've been there, but since we're able to sort of have this workshop format, we can spend a little bit more time on this, and that is in consulting resources. We only spent maybe an hour discussing this topic in class, but I wanted to spend today to really focus our attention on not just what resources are good to use or not, but how do you use them? And at least I'll show you the approach that I take, and maybe you can share a little bit of how you approach it as well as we talk about it. So I want to again spend this morning focusing on this part of it, consulting resources. This is the last step in the exegetical process before we get to the author's what, why, how, which is the culmination, the end point for the exegetical study is determining what the author's message is. All right, now let's just review a couple of things regarding resources, and then we'll dive into the practical aspects. The first thing is, as we mentioned last time, the types of resources that are helpful. We're not just talking about commentaries, but also study Bibles or theology books, encyclopedias, sermons, articles that you might find on the internet, things like that. So we're talking about all kinds of resources that would address the particular subject or topics or the passage itself that you're studying. All right, so keep that in mind. It's not just commentaries that we're interested in, though those are also very helpful. Now, this step we have late in the process, again, because resources should only be consulted after you do your work. And there's a lot of reasons for that we talked about last time, but the one again that I want to really emphasize is the command that Paul gave to Timothy in 2 Timothy 2:15, that we need to be diligent to show ourselves approved, handling accurately the word of truth. And so this idea of just diligent, hard work, we must put in. Okay, Paul was telling Timothy, you have to be diligent. He's not saying, commentators you read need to be diligent, or preachers that you listen to need to be diligent, or people that write blogs online need to be diligent. Certainly they need to be diligent if they're studying the word, but he says, Timothy, you need to be diligent. And so we take that to heart ourselves as we study the scripture, that we must be diligent. So that means we have to do some digging. It'd be like if we were going to go outside and we had to dig a hole to put a plant in the ground. And if I were to go outside with my shovel and just stand there with my shovel, I'm not going to get any work done. I can't expect someone else to do it. I need to do the work myself. And then an expert or someone can come along and help me to do it well. Maybe somebody who knows how to garden really well can give me some tips. That's fine, but I need to be the one digging that particular hole. And this is especially the case when it comes to scripture. You and I, as servants of the Lord, as we bring the word to God's people, we must put in our best effort. God expects us to be faithful. All right, so that's the main reason, I think, one of the primary reasons that we need to put in our own effort before we seek the advice or counsel or input from others. All right, now again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't use resources, or that resources are bad, or that if you use a resource then you're not working hard. I'm not saying that at all. But what I am saying is we wait, do the work ourselves, and then let's consult other resources and see how they can help us better understand the text, how they can help us better communicate the text. Okay, So again, just some reminders about some principles to keep in mind as we approach the use of resources. All right. Are there any questions or comments on that? That's just by way of review, but anyone have any thoughts or things they'd like to add or ask? Okay. All right. One other thing, just keep this in mind as well. As you use a resource, whether it's a commentary or a sermon or anything, know something about the author of the book or know something about the preacher, meaning what's his background? Is he a Christian? What doctrinal position does he come from? What kind of church has he come from? What kind of seminary did he train at? That'll help you to know a little bit about his background, his theological perspective, and that's important and helpful when we consult a resource. Is he a reliable resource? And sometimes you'll need to ask others in order to determine that. Don't trust everything the author says as biblically accurate. I think we all know that. Even the Bereans, they had the great Apostle Paul who would come and teach them. Even they said, you know what? We know this Paul guy, he's sent from the Lord, but we want to make sure. So let's study ourselves and read the text ourselves and make sure that what he's saying is coming out of the text. And it's the same for us. We need to make sure that we are checking those that we are reading, and if what they're saying is coming from the text. And that takes me down to the fifth point here. Look for resources that give a clear explanation from the text as to how they came to their interpretation. All right? Again, you should be able to, as you're going through this resource, whether it's a sermon or a commentary or a study Bible, you should be able to see how that person who's writing or speaking, how they got what they are saying, what they're interpreting from the passage. Okay? Very important. Don't just look at one resource. We need to have a variety of resources available to us. So find good resources. And again, the commentary is a tool, or again, I should say, any resource is a tool to help in the exegetical process. It's not one we should be copying completely from. We can borrow ideas, and if we do that, make sure to give credit. And then last week, and I sent this on your handout, these are some helpful online resources. What I wanted to do was just spend a minute or a couple of minutes here and highlight a few of these resources that are here. The first one, but before that, I'm sorry. Here's some other helpful online resources for the Psalms, and again, I gave that to you in the handout last time. And then here's some good commentaries that we discussed. And you'll have all of these in the notes that I send out in the next couple of days. What I'd like to do is go to a couple of resources here. I want to take you to this one by Irving Jensen. I think I mentioned this last time. Let me pull up.
Snip. Smith. Snip. In. Snip.
All right, here we go. Now, can everybody see that? Can you see a Jensen survey of the Old Testament and New Testament? You guys all see that? I'm on this particular website, this link.
Yes.
All right. So just take a look. I just want to show you a little bit. You can download this. Notice it's 2,600 pages. So what we have here is a... Getting some background noise. Who's not muted here? Make sure you're muted for me. So here's a really helpful resource, and these are an overview of the Old Testament and New Testament books. So as we go through here, if I can scroll up, let me get it to, so these are all the copyright, etc. All right, he's got it, some basic content, introduction to how he approaches things, how he does a survey, and then notice he has each book of the Bible. And what's nice about this resource is it's set up in a PDF file so that you can go, and I'm going to just press Psalms. All right. Now here, this particular resource, he gives overviews of the book. He doesn't, it's not a commentary on every chapter in a book, but he gives a significant overview of the background of the book, how to approach the book. And in fact, for Psalms, he's going to talk about many of the things we've discussed. Literary devices is part of the chapter. He'll discuss the background of the Psalms, authors, how they fit in the Bible, things like that. This is a really helpful resource to use as an introductory resource to when you're studying the book as a whole. All right? And again, this is for every book in the Bible. And I've used Irving Jensen a lot. I really like him. He's got a lot of great detail and really helpful study of the books. Okay, so that's one particular resource. And again, it's a PDF file that you can access, and I put the link in your notes. Another resource that you're hopefully familiar with by now, because we've mentioned it, I think, in every class, but let me just show it to you. It's Tom Constable's notes. I don't know if you guys have used Tom Constable's notes, but here, this is the link to that. And notice he's got notes on every book of the Bible, and his notes are not just on the book as a whole, but he actually does discuss specific passages within the book. So for example, if we're studying Psalms, let me just hit that link. And here he's got an overview of the book of Psalms, as you can see, just like Irving Jensen did. But then notice, I'm just going to go down, he also goes through each psalm. And he'll have helpful comments on particular verses. Now, it's not a lot of detail, but it's some detail. And he'll cover the key issues within particular psalms, offering some interpretation. So if we go to our psalm, Psalm 99, wow, look at that. Went right to it. He's got information on our psalm, some general information, and then his outline of the psalm, and some commentary on each stanza. Okay, so this is a helpful, it gives an overview of the book you're studying, but then also he'll give a little bit of information on the passage you're studying, almost like the Bible Knowledge Commentary. But this one is online. You can access it very easily. Tom Constable's notes. I would recommend that as well. Another really helpful resource is The Treasury of David by Spurgeon. All right. How many of you are familiar with this resource? Show me who's familiar with Treasury of David. Most of you seen that or used it? I really like it because, for one, it's Spurgeon. This is really the only commentary that Spurgeon has written where he goes through verse by verse. Very interesting. Much of his material is topical, but in this particular case, Spurgeon has, on the Treasury of David, gone through each and every psalm and every verse. So here we just go right on this page. We can go right to the psalm we're interested in, and we want Psalm 99. So I'm going to hit that. And here we go. He's got introductory remarks, and then notice he has quite a bit to say about each verse. All right, he comments on phrases within each verse. All right, you guys see that? We're not going to read what he says there, but he gives his commentary basically on each verse. And then what I like about this psalm is he quotes from other scholars, commentators, preachers from his time period or earlier. So it's a nice summary of older material from before the late 1800s. So for example, J.J.S. Perrone, he takes each verse. Let me just go down to verse 1. Notice, verse 1, he gets commentaries from, and here's one from an early church father, Emeraldus, and then William Nicholson, John Gill, the Puritan. All right, and he just has comments on each phrase within the psalm. And notice here for this verse 1, this phrase, let the people tremble, he's got five, or four, is it four? Four other comments from people. The cherubim, he's got 1, 2, 3 comments. Augustine is one of them. Matthew Henry, also verse 1. So there's a wide variety of scholars and commentators and pastors that Spurgeon has pulled from that we wouldn't have the time to go find all of this, right? I mean, how many of you have the early church father 32 volume set of the ante-Nicene fathers in your house? Anybody have that? No? It's a page turner. No, I don't have any of those volumes. I go to the library, but
I have soft copy
okay, you have the software. Oh,
from yeah the three volumes one, but one volume is several books.
yeah, it's
Yeah,
at the library, the ante-Nicene and post-Nicene, so the pre
yeah,
4th century and after 4th
three,
century,
nine, and
huge.
four post. Yeah,
So, but even then, how many of us would have not only access to that, but then time to go through all of those and find Psalm
It's in the
99? And
eSword, Pastor Tim.
what's that? eSword has
eSword.
it. Logos
Yeah.
has them too. I have them on Logos. But
Yeah.
even still, what I really like is this is Spurgeon. He's sort of taken key statements from different men in history.
Mhm.
So it's a helpful resource, is my point. Certainly we can look ourselves at these things, but he's sort of done some of the work for us and comments and input that he's found useful. So I really like Treasury of David. I like Spurgeon, but I think this is, like I said, one of the few resources from Charles Spurgeon where it's really exegetical, where he's really digging into each phrase of the text. All right, so I would highly recommend this resource, and again, you have the link in your notes. And then another helpful resource that we're going to look at in more detail that I've shown you once before is drbarrick.org. I think I've shown this to you, have I? Dr. Barrick's website. Okay, he's got lots of helpful stuff here, but if you go under teaching and the Psalms, he's got all the Psalms, and he's got notes for every Psalm. So if we wanted to study Psalm 99, he's got his Sunday school audio version, and then he's also got his class notes. Uh-oh, what did I hit here? There we go. All right, where he has written his commentary, not detailed, but he has given input on, and we're going to look at this a little bit later. We're going to use this as a resource. One other thing I want to highlight for you is the Bible Project. I think most of you are probably familiar with this. Let me hit it here. Okay, this is something, the Bible Project, I think we looked at one of these videos in class for narratives. We looked at the Samuel video. This is, I don't know, can you hear that? Okay.
No.
There's no sound.
There's no sound.
Okay. You guys can look it up yourselves later. The link is there in your notes. It'll be there. But basically, the Bible Project, what they do is they go over every book of the Bible, and they will discuss the general structure. And let me take you to, and they do it with drawing. It's really cool how they, at least, let's just, you don't have to listen to it right now, but you can see. So you can see them filling. So notice he's broken down the book into different sections, and so they give a nice overview, and it's really
Pastor
interesting.
Tim.
Yeah.
Pastor Tim, is this read scripture?
Pardon me?
Read scripture. Is this the one?
Read
You're
scripture.
showing.
Read scripture?
Yeah.
yes, Pastor.
What do you mean?
The app, the phone.
Yeah, there's an app on the phone.
Yes. Read scripture.
Read
That's right.
Read scripture.
That's right. Read
Yeah.
scripture.
Okay,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Project.
Is that
Wait,
read scripture?
Yeah, you can download it in your device,
Yes.
phone, and then
Yes, in the phone you can
kind
download it.
of like that also.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And so really what I like about these guys is how they take a book and they look at the book overall and how it connects together. Now the Psalms
Yes.
are a little different because remember I told you it's not one single book with one purpose and theme. It's a collection of independent poems. But what this is able to do is just sort of show how the collection and each book has some of the themes within that. And I don't agree with everything I see on this on Bible Project. There's some things that I wouldn't agree with, but generally speaking, I've liked much of what they've done. Again, this resource is more for getting the big picture. It won't help you with Psalm 99 specifically, but it would help just kind of giving you an overview of the book as a whole. All right, kind of like Irving Jensen's notes. All right, so those are just a few resources online that I wanted to highlight for you. In your notes, there are several others that you can find there to use. Let me head back to our notes. Okay, so I just wanted to again highlight. Again, notice here's all of the links for Psalm resources. Here's all the links for general resources that you can find different things on, okay? Now, let's go to the next step here. How do we use these things? How do we use these resources? All right. I take an approach, structured approach myself. Do we just pick up a resource and kind of thumb through it? Do we compile notes from the resource? Do we read all the resource or part of it? How do we collect those notes? How would we remember the things that we read on the resource? Is everything that the resource has something we need to take note of? How do we approach this? So using resources is more than just reading through them or listening to the sermon. I believe there needs to be an organized and thoughtful approach to how you use a particular resource so that you can maximize its effectiveness and its value. And so for me, this is how I approach it. This is what's been helpful for me. I'm not saying everybody needs to do it this way, but I just want to offer this to you as something to consider when you're using resources. I basically have two steps. So let's say I have, we're going to look at Dr. Barrick's notes in a minute for an example. So let's say I have Dr. Barrick's notes on Psalm 99. How am I going to use those? Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I read through the resource and identify helpful comments. Now, some of these may seem obvious to you, and if they do, I'm sorry, but I'm just trying to kind of show you how I approach it. So what I do is I'll take the resource, and often what I'll do, because at this point in time, we're very familiar with the Psalm. We've done a lot of work on the Psalm already on our own, right? We've read it how many times together? We've looked at the parallelism in the Psalm. We've looked at the setting of the Psalm, the structure of the Psalm. We've considered all the imagery, poetic devices, the figurative language. We've done word studies. We've done all this work. We're very familiar with the Psalm at this point. And so when I'm looking at a resource, I already have in my mind certain things that I've studied that maybe I still have a question about, or I'm already very familiar with the Psalm, so I can read fairly quickly through the resource because I've already spent a bunch of time studying the Psalm myself. And so there will be things, you'll notice this. For example, if you pick up a resource before you've done any study in the book, whether it's a Psalm, whatever passage it is, let's say you're going, okay, I'm gonna preach Psalm 106 this week. Now, I haven't read that Psalm in a long time, but let me go. I'm gonna pick up Treasury of David, and I'm just gonna start reading Treasury of David. Well, guess what's gonna happen? If the Psalm is new to you, then everything you're gonna be reading more slowly through that commentary because you're not familiar with the Psalm at all, and so you're trying to figure out the Psalm at the same time as you're reading what these other comments are. It's going to be a very slow process, honestly. But if you've already done all the work that we have done in that particular psalm. When you pick up a resource, you're going to be able to rapidly move through much of it because you're already, you skim, oh, Lord reigneth, okay, I'm familiar, you'll move through it much more quickly because you're familiar with the psalm, you've studied the psalm, and you'll pick up on things in the resource that, oh, well, that's interesting. I never thought about that. So things will stick out to you more with the resource because you've done all this work on your own at the beginning. So you will find that, and I'm telling you, I've experienced this where sometimes I've, been given a passage and I just go start studying the commentaries too early, and I'm not familiar enough with the passage that I'm relying on these commentaries, and it's taking me a lot longer to go through them. But when I'm really familiar with the passage, I don't spend as much time in the commentaries because I can read through and more quickly pick out the things that are helpful. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Maybe you've experienced that yourself.
Yes.
All right, I'm still getting some feedback here. Make sure you're muted, guys, unless you want to give some input. There's a little bit of background noise. So the first step is I take the resource and I read through it, and then as I'm reading through it, again, because of my familiarity with the passage, things will stick out to me that more quickly. All right. And then what I do is, if I have it in paper form, I'll make notes on the paper, or if I have it in electronic form, I'll either highlight it or I'll cut and paste any comments that I find to be helpful or useful. All right. So that's the first step. Again, this is a simple step, but I want to highlight the fact that, if you are really familiar, let's write this out, with the psalm, then you will find that you can read through the resource more quickly. Now, if you are listening to a sermon, that's a little bit harder to do. You wouldn't speed up the sermon necessarily, but I still think at times, you can pick up things that are more, because you've studied, you'll be able to interact more with the sermon on your own that way. So read through the resource, identify helpful comments. When I listen to sermons, what I do is I'll often just type in my notes. So I have a document where I have notes from sermons I've listened to on helpful comments or quotes that I hear within the sermon. And
In
again,
addition, Pastor Tim,
yes.
in addition to that, Pastor Tim, you will not be completely influenced by the commentary itself, but you have your own understanding already because you have already studied it first.
Exactly.
So it's kind of it's an addition lang.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just an addition.
Yeah.
And
So
also
the bias
too,
is oh, yeah.
what's that?
There's no complete bias.
Yeah, there's no complete bias. And
Yeah.
and I'm also harder to convince now. So the commentator has to prove it more.
Correct. Yes.
And that doesn't mean I shouldn't be open to changing my view, but what it does mean is that
at least you can balance, which is right. Correct.
You can balance it, and he better have a strong argument or be able to show very clearly from the text if it's something I don't agree with. He'll need to show me very clearly from the text. So I'm less influenced by just what a commentator says. Yeah.
If the commentary that you have been reading and will go against your kind of understanding of the text, is it healthy to again dig for another commentaries, look for another commentaries? Is it correct?
That's a good question. I still, what I try to do is, okay, he says something I don't agree with. So I go, okay, how is he finding this from the passage? So if he's able to show me, this word means this, and the grammar here, and the context, and I go, okay, well, maybe that might make sense. what I do then is then I take another resource, and if he says the same thing, I go, well, you know what? Maybe this guy has a point. So it's really it's like a conversation, right? Like if you and I were having a discussion and on some particular topic, and we had a different opinion, and so you would explain why you have this interpretation, and I would explain, and so we sort of talking to each other to try to show each other from the passage, from the context, how we came to that interpretation. But if one of us is not familiar with the passage, then how are we going to argue from the text or discuss from the text our position? And so it's sort of like that. I look at commentaries as or resources as somebody I'm having a discussion with, and they need to convince me from the passage. And maybe if I've had many times where they've said things and I go, oh, you know, I hadn't thought about that. He has a good point. And then that's why I say don't just use one resource, but if you look at a couple of other ones and they say the same thing, I go, you know what, maybe I'm wrong here.
Sir Tim,
Yeah.
looking for resources, it is just like checking and balance of
Yes.
text that we are studying.
That's how you should see them, as a balance, as a maybe like an advisor, somebody that can maybe support your view, or maybe they have a different view, and you'll need to be able to defend your interpretation sometimes. And if you can't defend it, you know, if this guy brings up a strong interpretation from the passage and you're not able to defend it from the passage, that can maybe convince you maybe I'm not completely accurate here. So yeah, balance is one of the helpful things with a resource. Also, sometimes resources will say things in a certain way that sound better, that are more clear. You know, I've had that happen so many times where I've studied a passage and I pretty much know what it's saying, but then I read somebody and he says it in a really clear way. It's like, that's exactly what it is. So I often find that to be the case as well. Or sometimes maybe I've done a word study and I've just not found anything that's been really helpful, and a resource will maybe have a comment on that particular word and give me more insight or good illustration or things like that. So resources are a balance, but they also can enhance. Maybe I can put it that way. Resources serve as a balance to our interpretation, but can also enhance or help clarify our interpretation. All right? So, like I said, and I keep repeating this because I want to emphasize the importance of it. The more familiar you are with the text, the more you're going to get out of a resource, because you can have a dialogue, so to speak, with this commentary. You've studied things, you have an understanding from the passage yourself. And so this resource is really going to have to convince you if it's a different interpretation than you have. Okay? Any other thoughts or questions? Again, resources to me should be more like a peer, not a tutor. Does that make sense? A peer is somebody, a co-equal you have discussions with, that you've studied the passage, he studied the passage, now we discuss it together. A tutor is someone who tells you how to interpret the passage, right? Just like an instructor. They're essentially telling you how you should understand this material, as opposed to a peer, P-E-E-R. A peer, well, you can have a discussion with sort of at an equal level. That's the balancing idea, the enhancing idea. All right, does that make sense? I think many resources you should be able to see that way, because you've studied the text enough yourself that it's a discussion between peers, not you sitting under a tutor. Now, some commentators, who are like, for me, Dr. Barrick, for example, I look at him not as a peer, because I mean he's an expert in Hebrew, especially Hebrew poetry, and so when he says things, I weigh them much more carefully, um, because I consider that he knows a lot, and so I take what he says very carefully, and doesn't mean I just accept everything he says, but what it does mean is I give serious thought to, especially if he has a different viewpoint. Like, okay, he's a smart guy. He really studies. He knows this. So let me try to understand what the reason is that he's come to that. And sometimes, many times, I'll be convinced, and other times it's like, no, I still think I'm correct in what I'm thinking. Okay. Any other comments, questions? All right, you guys with me? Still awake? Most of you? That's good.
Yes.
All right.
Pastor Tim,
Yes, sir.
question.
Yes, sir.
How do we know? How do we know if this commentary is sound or not? Like if this commentary is a cult member person who do the commentary of the Bible,
Yeah. Well, that's why, as we discussed, let me see here, earlier, when I said know something about the author of the commentary, and I really should put in there, or resource, you really need to know something about the person that you're reading. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That's why if you're studying Psalm 99, don't do Psalm 99 commentary search, and you're going to get all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it that way, because sometimes you'll get guys that you've never heard of, you don't know anything about, and so I would just be careful there. So, try to investigate a little bit about the author, and also too, you can ask other men that you trust, that are solid. Say, hey, I'm studying the Psalm 99 right now. Do you have any commentators or pastors, preachers that you found helpful, that you trust? So that's a way you can get other input from other men that you trust, who they listen to, who they get their information from. But really know something about the author. So sometimes, if I'm listening to sermonaudio.com and I come across a particular sermon and I'm listening to it a little bit, and I'll think, and I'll look up the guy and see what kind of church he's at, or if he's a pastor or a scholar, and I'll try to do a little bit of homework if I can. But a lot of times we don't have time to do that kind of stuff, so I'll just ask other people that I know, hey, do you know anything about this guy? And usually somebody knows something. All right. Also, too, some commentary sets, have a reputation. Like, for example, the Pillar commentaries. Those have a reputation. That's D.A. Carson's the editor for those. So they have a reputation of being solid commentaries. But if you look at something like Word commentary, some of them are good, some of them are not as good. All right, so that can be a mix. So some commentaries get a reputation. Of course, the New Testament, MacArthur New Testament commentaries, they have a reputation of being really solid. So you can trust, any of those. There's another resource called I think it's called Best Commentaries. Is that right, guys? You familiar with this one? bestcommentaries.com. I think is what it's called. They have some they'll give you some good guidance as well, into some good commentaries to use. But yeah, don't do the, I call it the blind luck method, where you just, type in Psalm 99 interpretation on the internet, on Google, and just then go randomly to some, that's the blind luck. You might get lucky and have a good guy, but probably not. So, but what you could do is do Psalm 99 D.A. Carson, or Psalm 99 Steve Lawson, Psalm 99 Dr. William Barrick. If you know guys that you trust, you could type in that passage with their name, and maybe something will pop up from them. Okay? Long answer to a short question, but did that?
Pastor Tim,
Yeah.
how about preacher commentary?
How about what?
Preacher. Yep. Preacher.
Spell that for me.
Preacher. Preacher.
Preacher's
P-R-E.
commentary.
Preacher's commentary.
Yeah.
Oh, preacher's commentary. Yeah, who's the editor for that? Do you know? I think I know the one you're talking about. It's an older commentary, I think, right?
Yes.
Is that from like G. Campbell Morgan?
Yes, J. Campbell Morgan.
Okay.
Solid.
Yeah, G. Campbell Morgan is good. He's more of a preacher. He's a good preacher. I would say you probably won't get a lot of exegetical information from him. He's focused more on the preaching side of it. So,
Humility.
yeah, it's
Yes.
more homiletic. He's got good
Yes.
illustrations. He likes to use this word a lot, arresting. I don't know if he uses that word all the time. So he would be more of a, yeah, you would call more of an expositional, meaning that he can be helpful for, you know, illustrations, basic understanding of the text overall. But like if you wanted to do a particular word study or understand the details of a certain phrase, you know, he may or he may not say something about it.
If you do not have time to prepare, go to this person.
Well, if you don't have time to prepare, don't preach it yet. Do an old sermon.
Go to this person. He has already made it up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta be diligent. You show yourself approved. All right. But yeah, there's some helpful things there. I've used it from time to time. Can you access this online? Is it online? Preacher's commentary.
I think you can.
Okay. I'm not familiar with it. If it is. All right. Let's go to, so the first step in using a resource is read through the resource or listen to it and identify anything helpful as you go through there by highlighting, underlining, copying, cut and paste, anything like that. Take a picture of it with your phone. I've done that in the library too, by the way. I've gone in the library here at, you know, Master's Library, and sometimes I'll just take a picture because it's just a few quotes or comments, and I don't want to take the book with me. I don't want to try to photocopy it. Obviously, I can't write in it. It's not mine. So I just take a picture on my phone, and that's another way to do it. The second step is once you've read through, identify helpful comments, then incorporate those comments into what I'll call an exegetical document in a verse-by-verse summary. And I'll explain this. Basically, what I do is I categorize. So I take, say I'm reading through Spurgeon's Treasury of David, and there's all these comments about verse 1. And I'm reading through, and I'll pick, you know, oh, that's a helpful comment, or oh, I like how he worded that, or this is a good explanation. So I identify those things from verse 1, and then I will type those in or copy those into a Word document that I have, that I'm compiling, that I'm collecting all of this information, and I collect it with for each verse. So stuff about verse 1, I put in my document under verse 1. I'll show you this in a couple of minutes, all right? But the second part of it is just taking those helpful comments that I identified and then organizing them in a document, okay? All right, so let's do this. We're going to use Dr. Barrick's notes, but before we do, what happened to I wanted us to read, where'd it go? That was weird. All right, let's do this. I want us to read the psalm together. So let me cut and paste it real quick. All right, then I'll do like we've done before. I'll just have three of us read. All right, let's do this. Apologize for the delay, men. Okay. There we go. All right. Brother German, I'm going to ask if you could read verses 1 through 3. Pastor Charlie, verses 4 to 6. And Pastor Jess, verses 4 to 6, verses 7 through 9. Pastor Jess, all right? So make sure unmute yourself. Go ahead and read your section.
Okay, start.
Go
The
ahead.
Lord reigns, the Lord reigns, let the peoples tremble. He is enthroned above the cherubim, let the earth shake. The Lord is great in Zion, and he is exalted above all the peoples. Let them praise your great and awesome name. Holy is he.
The strength of the king loves justice. You have established equity. You have executed justice and righteousness in Jacob. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his footstool. Holy is he. Moses and Aaron were among his priests, and Samuel was among those who called on his name. They called upon the Lord, and he answered them.
He spoke to them in the pillar of cloud. They kept his testimonies and the statutes that he gave them. O Lord our God, you answer them. You were forgiving God to them, and yet an avenger of their evil deeds. Exalt the Lord our God and worship at his foot at his holy hill, for holy is the Lord our God.
All right, very good. Okay, so let's head over to Dr. Barrick's notes. So we've studied this passage, we've gone through all of these steps, and now we are ready to use our resources. So one of the resources we'll have is drbarrick.org. All right. So what I'll do is, and usually I'll have this resource, I'll print it out. I'm still old-fashioned. I like paper. So if I can print it out, I will, because then I can write on it, highlight it, stuff like that. But if you can't, that's perfectly fine, of course. And what I'll do is I'll go through his notes, and for example, what struck me with these are his introductory notes. I noticed this caught my eye. Triplets are characteristic of Psalm 99. 3 times exalt, 3 times he is holy. And then what struck me was, oh, you know what? That's exactly, if you remember Isaiah chapter 6, the cherubim flying overhead, with the wings covering their eyes and the wings covering their feet, and they're crying out in Isaiah 6, holy, holy, holy. Remember that? And then in Revelation chapter 4, the beings that are in the throne room of God, they're crying out the same thing, holy, 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 3 times. And in this psalm, the statement, he is holy, is made 3 times. So I thought, oh, that's an interesting insight. So I highlight it. Then I keep going through. Again, I'm familiar with the Psalms, so some things I don't see as really important or as interesting, or I've maybe already seen that insight. Psalm 99 is part of the theocratic Psalms or the enthronement Psalms, so I might highlight that or underline it. And then he has the Psalm here where notice he bolds, holy is he, those 3 times that it's used to emphasize that. And now here are his notes. He has an outline. All right, I'll take note of that. He breaks it up into, notice, 3 stanzas, just like we did. And then he has comments on each verse. He talks about Zion. He addresses this phrase. Name is one of the ties between Psalm 99 and Psalm 100. That might be something if you find interesting or helpful from your study. And we just keep going through. Holy is he. Now, here's something in verse 4. I thought, I had trouble understanding this phrase. The strength of the king loves justice. And remember, we looked at different translations, and they were all different. And he even notes that. The translation of this line is difficult. Yep, I had a hard time too. And it can be taken a number of ways, and he puts those different ways. And then he puts his interpretation, that the Lord himself has power and uses it to bring justice, which he loves. So I found these comments helpful, so I highlight the whole thing, because this was a phrase I was particularly interested in. Now, this is an example of what I'm talking about, men. When we studied the psalm and went through it, this was one phrase that was a little confusing to me, because each translation interpreted it differently. When I did a word study, it wasn't really clear to me either. And so I'm already thinking, verse 4 was a hard verse for me. And as I'm reading through, that's going to stand out to me, what he says about verse 4, because that's something I really wanted to have some input on. Now, but if I'm not familiar with any of the psalm, then I'm not going to understand the importance of his comments in verse 4, because all the comments here are going to be seem important, because I don't really know the psalm. But because I have studied the psalm, I can sort of glean. I can pick and choose, because I'm already familiar with much of it, and I can know what are the places I found difficult. Those are the things I'm going to concentrate on when I use the resource. You see how that it can be helpful? I'll spend a lot of time on the places that I didn't understand well myself from the psalm, but I won't spend much time on the other things in the resource, because I'm already pretty familiar with them, and I think I know them pretty well. So I just skim those. Like verse 3 here is comments. I just skim those. But verse 4, I pay a little more attention to. Okay? And so I just go through. And notice, here's another thing, that verse 5, his footstool. And here, I'm curious, okay, what does Dr. Barrick have to say about that? I studied footstool. He says the Ark of the Covenant's called God's footstool. Worship at God's footstool reflects the common ancient Near Eastern practice of bowing at the feet of a king on his throne. All right? So again, I'm very interested in footstool. I did a little study of my own. What does he say about that? So I'll highlight that. Another question that we had was in verse 6, Moses and Aaron and Samuel. How are they connected together? So I'm curious about that. And notice Dr. Barrick says these three interceded for the people and acted as guardians of the Lord's statutes they had received. And then he gives a couple passages. So I'll go look those up. All right, so this is what I do. Just go through, and there are places that the resource will address that I had questions about. I'll focus on those. And I won't spend a lot of time on the things that I already feel pretty comfortable about. I'll just do a little bit just to see what they say. All right, so what I'll do then is I'll take those comments. Let me go back to our notes. And what I did was essentially, these are the comments that I highlighted. All right, and we're not going to go through all of them. I'm just showing. You'll have these notes. You can look at it yourself when I send them to you in the next couple days. But these are all the things. This isn't everything Dr. Barrick said, but these are the things that I gleaned, that I took from what he said, that I found helpful or interesting. All right, he wrote lots of other things too, but these are the things. And notice I organized them by verse. I had those comments about verse 4, verse 5, 6, all right? And that's what I do. So I just highlight, underline, copy all those comments. And then what I do is I incorporate, the second step is I incorporate those comments into a document. So I take all of my resources, every resource that I look at, and I collect them. So for example, let's say this is what verse 3 would look like. I looked up awesome. I did sort of a brief word study. I just looked up the definition for awesome. Verse 3, Barak. These are the comments that I took from Dr. Barak on verse 3. So I put those, and notice I put his name here. And then I had some comments. I listened to a sermon by Austin Duncan on this psalm. He's a pastor at Grace Church. He's preached a little bit at Shepherd's Conference. Really helpful. He did a sermon on Psalm 99 that I listened to, and I thought, this is really helpful. So these are some comments that I got from him on verse 3. And notice I put where I got the resource from. All right? You want to do this, not just to give credit in case I use something that he used or said, but sometimes you'll something will come to your mind that maybe you thought, that sermon, Austin Duncan said something about this. Where was that sermon? I don't remember. Or if you don't put his name in at all, let's say you just put stuff from his sermon, you may not remember where you got this. And you won't be able to go back and find it. So I put in, sorry. So what I do is I put in the person, and then these are some comments from verse 3. Here's some comments from Derek Kidner. And notice I put the resource. It's the Tyndale Old Testament commentary, the page number. This is what he said about in verse 3, E.W. Hengstenberg. Notice I put the page number and the volume where I got it. Some other passages that are helpful for verse 3. You see how I do that? So I'm just collecting all of these resources and putting them under verse 3. So now when I'm putting together my thoughts about verse 3, I have everything there. Here's some comments by theologians, Herman Bavinck and R.C. Sproul, about the idea of holy, what that means. And then another comment from another commentary. All right, so these are just, and then sometimes I throw in, these are my own thoughts. Sometimes I'll put in my own comments, all right? So it's simply just going through a resource, identifying those parts in the resource that you find helpful, then taking those parts and putting them in a document where you're collecting all the resources that you're looking, and then put them in by verse. All right? So let me show you what this looks like for me when I'm done. Hopefully you're still tracking with me. All right, let's see here. Give me a minute to pull this file up. So what I'll do is I'll call this, I have a document that I've called Psalm 99 Exegetical Notes. All right, and this will be all of the study that I've put into this particular psalm. And hopefully, can you guys see that? Exegetical Notes, Psalm 99. Does everyone see that? This is my golden document, because this has all of it. Everything I've studied, I put in one place. I put in one document, all right? And I call it my exegetical notes, all right? So I have the passage, and then here's the steps, guys. So I do read and observe. Some comments I have, the background context. I only have a few notes here on this one. Type in the structure, the outlines, the parallelism that we talked about, the figurative language we discussed. And then here's my verse by verse notes. All right? These are introductory notes for the psalm as a whole from different authors. Then verse 1, I have various comments from the different resources, Kyle and Delich, Hengstenberg, Daryl Alexander. All right? Verse 2, verse 3, verse 4, 5. You see that? So I've organized this by verse, and then you can even organize it by phrase within the verse. You know, line 1, what are all the input you've gotten from different resources in line 1? of verse 6, line 2 of verse 6. Okay? You guys with me on this? If this isn't helpful, don't worry about it. This is not like the way you have to do it. This is the way I do it. I just try to keep it organized. Because if you have some notes here, some notes there, if you've cut out a page of another notes, if I just would forget things. So I try to just keep everything collected together and organized, and I do it by verse. And so that way now, as I'm going through the passage to teach it, I have notes. Sometimes I'll have illustrations from other sermons in here, or just anything that I found for that particular verse. I'll put it under that verse. Okay? And then I have everything in one place. But like I said before, what I've seen guys do is if they haven't really studied the passage much themselves, they'll have a resource. They'll cut out huge chunks, like paragraphs and paragraphs or pages of the resource, and just copy it. But all the stuff that's there won't necessarily be helpful. But if you've studied the passage, there'll be a few things in there that will be helpful. Again, ways that they express a certain understanding, or an interpretation of a difficult part that you had trouble with. Those are the things I'm most interested in. All right, so in the past, when guys have turned in this assignment for the resources, I see they just cut and paste large sections. But really, notice, I don't have any large sections cut and paste. They're all just these bullet point comments, right? Short things that I found helpful. You see that? I don't have like big, long statements. These are passages, so they're longer. But notice every comment, Westermann, I just have a short statement on the cloud because I thought what he said was helpful. Austin Duncan from his sermon. Okay? So this is how I organize things as far as consulting resources. Are there any questions? Comments? Have I bored you enough?
Pastor Tim,
Yes, sir.
when you going to preach a passage like this, will you be mentioning all these authors, all these commentators that you've been getting these thoughts? Will you
No.
be, okay.
Only like, for example, if I like how a certain author says something, or if it's a thought that I didn't have that I bring into the sermon, then I give credit. So, for example, I might say, you know, if I hadn't thought about this Leviticus 16 statement and God as a sin bearer pictures the cross, I might say, you know, at this part in the sermon, as Pastor Austin Duncan reminds us, Leviticus 16 gives the picture of blah, blah, like that. I might say it that way. But no, I won't say, you know, all of these different resources. This is for my understanding. Now, if I use something from one of them, then I will, of course, give credit to them in the message. But a lot of times, you know, as you guys know, not a lot of this is going to come into the sermon as far as directly. But what
Yes.
a lot of this does is informs me, and then I write out my own sermon and follow the outline I came up with some input from these resources. But they're more of a balance, as someone said, or an enhancement. They're not the thing that I draw everything from, if that makes sense. Did that answer your question, Jess? Or
Thank you, Pastor Tim.
okay. All right. Any other thoughts or questions? Again, you'll have, you know, I'll give you this in your notes so you can take a look. But I just wanted to try to give you a general idea of how I collect and organize these things. It's so important that you organize things well. for one thing, it keeps everything together, and then we just forget stuff. And sometimes what I've done is I've written out my sermon, and then I go back and I look at my exegetical notes, and I go, oh yeah, I forgot about that. And I'll say, that's a really helpful point. I'm going to make sure, and I bring that in. So my exegetical notes are very helpful when they're organized this way, because then when I go back through them after I've written my sermon, sometimes there are things that I'd forgotten as I was writing my sermon that then I'm reminded of from my exegetical notes. All right. So, and then also too, if I preach this passage 5 years from now or 10 years from now, I at least have a good start. I don't have to redo everything. I can redo everything if, sometimes that's helpful, but actually I have all the study notes already put together, organized, and I can read through that, and that helps remind me of some things from the passage. All right, so they serve as a good resource for the future. Any other comments or questions?
Pastor Tim, what you look in the commentary, you give a thought sa ilang commentary that you put in your notes, or you just copy paste their comment?
Good question. Usually what I try to do, and I'm not always consistent with this, if I cut and paste, I'll put it in quotes. But if I just summarize, I don't put it in quotes.
Okay. So you it means that you understand the way you understand the commentary. That's how you paraphrase it, but that the original thought is the commentary.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tim.
Yeah, I try to put it in quotes. That tells me, I'm trying to see if I had anything here that I did that with. I typically summarize. Well, like for example here from Austin Duncan, I paraphrase this. All three of this is Moses, Aaron, and Samuel. All three are connected in one way here. And then I quoted him. They called on Yahweh. I don't know if I have any other examples of that. So that's the way I do it. And that then if I use that in my sermon, and if it's in quotes, then I'll know it's a direct copy, and I'll give credit to them. But even if I paraphrase it, I'll still give credit if it wasn't an original thought from me necessarily. Any other thoughts or questions? Okay. All right. Now we come to the critical step. We come to the goal of all of these steps that we've taken. All these weeks together. What is this? Week 11. So the 10 weeks before. Everything we've done together. Oh, I'm in the wrong file. That's why everything we've done together comes down to now wrong file. Comes down to this last step in the exegetical process. And that step is stating the author's what, why, and how. Okay? This is the center of the funnel, that figure that I show you every week when we begin. Right? This one. All right? We've gone down the funnel here. And now we've consulted resources. Now we're at the bottom of the funnel, at the middle of the hourglass here. And this is the focus. This is where all of the study is intended to lead us to, and that is to lead us to the author's what, why, and how. Okay? This is something we have talked about before, but what I like to do is just, again, express this is the goal of the exegetical process. What did the author intend for his audience to understand? This is the author's what, why, and how. Okay? Now, let me just ask you guys. When I say what, why, and how, what am I referring to for the author's what, why, and how? What are we looking for there? Jess?
The authorial intent. It's okay.
Okay, good. What the author intended to say to his audience. Okay, we're not talking about yet what we want to say to our audience. We first want to get to what did the author want to say to his audience. Remember, that's the first part. The exegesis is the study of the text, is the conclusion is what did the author mean to say? What did he want to say? And then we broke that up into a what, why, and a how. The what is the subject of the text. The author's main point. That is the what. All right. Who can tell me what the why is? What is the author's why?
The purpose. The purpose.
Okay. Good. The why is the we could say the context of the text, the author's reason or purpose for his main point.
Contextual matter.
Yeah, it's in your notes called the contextual matters, but basically it is why did the author make this point? Why is this the author's theme? Why is he talking about this particular subject? Okay, it's the purpose. You could have a passage and say that the what of this passage is Paul prays for the Colossians. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. Paul prays what for the Colossians? Paul prays the Colossians would grow in their love for one another. Okay, good. Why does he state that point? So the what is the point, the subject. Paul prays for the Colossians to love one another. But that's not all. We need to understand, why did he write that? All right? Because the Colossians were struggling with unity or whatever. They were listening to false teachers. Okay? You need to know the what. That's the subject matter of your text. And you need to know the why. That's the context. That's the reason that the author is addressing this particular topic. Okay? You must have both of those before you can accurately and clearly preach a passage. What is the point of this text? And why did the author give this point? Okay? That's critical. If you can't answer those two questions, the what and the why, then you don't fully understand the passage. You should know not only what is the main point the author is giving in this passage, but also why did he give this main point? What was the occasion? What was the motivation for it? And then the last is we call it the how. And that is simply just the outline of the text. That's the author's flow of thought. Okay? And for a poem, for an epistle, that is in the form of paragraphs. For a poem, it's in the form of what? What are the units of thought in a poem? What do we call those? Stanzas. Okay. So the outline of the passage is, in a poem, is the stanzas. Okay. So this is what we're after, is the author's subject, main point, the author's reason for giving that main point, and then the author's outline. That is to say, each stanza. Okay? So, for example, let's just consider, for example, the why. As we look at, sometimes the why can be found within the title of a psalm. Sometimes that gives, for example, Psalm 100. It's this, shout joyfully to the Lord all the earth, serve the Lord with gladness, come before him with joyful singing, know that the Lord himself is God. It is he who has made us, not we ourselves. So that's Psalm 100. So it's this psalm of exuberant, we would say the what is give God exuberant praise. But what is the why? Is there a why? Why did the psalmist focus on that point? Well, it's interesting. In the title is this, a psalm for thanksgiving. Now, that's how the New American Standard translated it. It's literally a psalm for the thank offering. What does that tell us? That gives us the why, actually, for the psalm. The what is, again, give God exuberant praise. Why? Do this when you're approaching him with your thank offering, is the idea. So as we come before the Lord to express thanks, the psalmist tells us how we are to do that. With exuberance, with passion, with joy, with great fervor and excitement. Okay? So he's saying, worship, praise the Lord with great excitement. Why? As you come before him to give thanks. This is how he wants you to do it. Or Psalm, there's the Psalm 120 to 134 where the title is a song of ascents. That tells us those psalms are written for the express purpose to sing together on their way to Jerusalem during one of the 3 great feasts each year. Okay, so sometimes the title will give you a little bit of the understanding of the why. Why did the author write this psalm? What prompted him? What is the context for this particular point? That is the why. And then sometimes it's in the title, not all the time. All right. Okay, any comments or questions? The what, why, how. Very much the same as when we did it for the epistles. Except with the epistle, the how was the paragraphs. Or, remember within the paragraph we had a block diagram and it identified those points. That was the how, the outline of that passage. In a poem, the outline is found from the stanzas. So let's do this for Psalm 99. Everything we studied, all the parallelisms and figurative language and block diagrams and word studies, consulting resources, we've done all this work. And it comes down to, okay, if we had to summarize what the author's main point for this psalm is, what would it be? What do you guys think? Psalm 99. And again, this is the author's main point. How does he express it?
Exaltation.
Okay, good. Exaltation. Now let's put it in the form of a sentence. Short sentence or phrase.
Exalt the Lord.
Yeah, okay. Exalt. And I would add to it, worship the Lord, right? He gives both of those commands. So I think the what is exalt
and worship.
and worship the Lord. The theme is the idea of exaltation. Now here, what is the why? Why does the author of this psalm tell us to exalt and worship the Lord?
Because of his holiness.
Yeah. For he is
He's holy.
Right? Doesn't he say that directly 3 times in this psalm?
Yes.
Let them praise Yahweh, for he is holy. Exalt and worship him at his footstool, for he is holy. Exalt and worship at his holy hill, for he is holy. Holy is the Lord our God. Okay, that's pretty clear, I think, from this psalm. 3 times he just repeats the command and the reason. Now the how, that is the outline. Now remember, we identified how many stanzas for this psalm?
3.
3 stanzas. We had verses 1 to 3, verses 4 to 5, and verses 6 to 9. Right? And I think we had, the idea was praise him for his greatness. Something like that. Verses 4 and 5 was worship, or we could say exalt and worship. I'll just put worship him for his justice. And then verses 6 to 9, worship him for his mercy. Something like that. Okay? We've talked about this before, and I think everything that we've studied continues to point us in this direction. That The first 3 verses focus on his greatness. Verses 4 and 5 focus on his justice. And 6 through 9 focus on his mercy, or we could say grace, something like that. Okay? Now again, we're just looking for summarizing the author's what, why, and how. So we're using his terms, his phrases to do that, all right? When we talk about our own sermon main point and outline, we might modify these a little bit to make them preach more effectively. Okay? Is anybody confused, or does anybody not see this what, why, and how? Any questions? I want to make sure. This is all the study we've been doing is meant to bring us to this point so we can identify what the author said, why he said it, and how he said it. Okay? Any questions? Okay. What I then do, when I come up with my exegetical outline, the author's what, why, how, I'll look at what others' resources have. And so here's some other resources and their outlines that I found. And what's interesting is, this is George Zemek. He identified 3 stanzas like we did. And notice he says the first stanza focuses on the Lord's supremacy, the second one on his justice, and the third one on his grace. Oh, that's similar to what we found. Dr. Barrick, this is his outline. The Lord is holy in his exaltation of being. So there's that idea of greatness. The Lord is holy in his execution of justice. The Lord is holy in his expression of, and he put forgiveness. But again, note 3 stanzas, similar to what we had come up with. Now here's some guys that Kidner had a little different one. He split it into 2 stanzas. But again, we had a lot of discussion about this and why there are 3 stanzas, because we see that holy is he, holy is he, holy is the Lord our God. It seems to divide it clearly into 3 stanzas, not 2. Graham Scroggie also had 3 stanzas, and then the MacArthur Study Bible only had 2 as well. But again, Dr. Barrick and Dr. Zemek, very close to what we had come up with. Okay? So I'll take that into account. If I looked at some other resources and they all had different than mine, I might think, okay, maybe I missed it. Okay? But the fact is, I found over half the resources I looked at had those same 3 stanzas that we had. Tells me, you know what, I think we're on the right track. Okay? So, this is the author's what, why, how. All right. Thoughts or questions? Are you sufficiently drained, tired?
Learning, Pastor Tim.
Okay.
See,
Learning.
I hope this is helpful. I know this isn't maybe as exciting as some of our other topics, but I really at least want to show you the practical way that I approach collecting the resources and then using them. But this is the main thing here, the what, why, and how. Because now we take this, and with the author's what, why, how, we're now ready to move from our exegesis into our exposition. Once we have determined this is what the author's focused on, this is why he's focused on this, and here is his outline, we're now ready to put our sermon together. Okay? And so this is a key step. If we're able to clearly understand and communicate, write down the author's subject, the context of that subject, and the outline for it, then we really are ready to preach the passage. Okay, because we understand what the author intended to say to his audience. Now I want to bring it to my world. How do I communicate these truths to my hearers? Okay? And so we have the exegetical steps for a poetic text, and then that moves us, and we're going to transition next time we meet into the expositional steps. Now that I've got the authors, what, why, how, I'm ready to put my sermon together. What are the steps that I go through to do that? So we'll again review each of these steps: the timeless truths, reflection, the sermon concept and outline, the manuscript, and then the notes. All right? Put those things together. So for this coming week, before we meet again, I'd like you to take a moment and look through the teacher's manual for the first module and just read through the notes on timeless truths to remind yourself of what those are, all right? And that'll help us next week as we gather together and discuss. All right? Any final questions or comments, or maybe questions? It doesn't have to be on this topic. It can be on anything if you have other questions or things like that. Anybody?
All is clear.
Praise the Lord. Hello?
Yeah.
Somebody has a bee in their house.
Grounded ang kuan, Mike. Grounded ang headset.
Mr. Tim,
Yes, sir.
are you coming this?
I think it's you. Fuego.
Yeah, you coming October?
Lord willing, it's gonna depend on if the Philippines will open up and allow visitors, then I will be there. So we're planning to have the class. I think it was the second. Is it the second week of October or the first week? Second week.
Maybe. I hope so. We have a high case of corona here in Cebu.
Yeah.
We are the epicenter right now in the whole Philippines.
So I've been praying that that we'll be able to, that I'll be able to come. So as soon as the country opens up, I'm gonna be there, Lord willing. So even if I have to quarantine for a couple weeks.
Yeah, you must be quarantined for sure.
So we'll see. That October is still a few months away. So we'll just pray. If I'm not able to come, then I've talked to Pastor DeVraj, and we're going to figure out a way to maybe do some way we're going to have the module, whether I'm there physically or we may try to do something a little different. If we have to do Zoom, we can do that. That's not my preference, but we'll see what happens. But let's be in prayer, brothers. Just obviously praying for our countries that God would show mercy upon us with this virus, but also too so that we could be able to gather together and continue to do the next module. And the next module is going to be fun because it's prophecy. So
it's more harder.
Yeah. but I want to hear.
It's more interesting.
Yeah. It is harder, but it's
that is more dangerous than coronavirus.
What's that, Eric?
That is most dangerous than coronavirus. Just kidding.
Yeah. Prophetic books are the most difficult. So we'll have a lot of fun with those. But yeah, keep praying. And right now, guys, too, I want you to start working on your getting your assignments done.
Yes.
So catch up on those. And I'm going to try to catch up on grading. I've put grading on hold for this time while we're doing this workshop, but I'm going to get back on that. So please work at turning your stuff in so that we're all ready in October. And we're gonna pray that the Lord will open things up for us, and just expect that to happen, and so we be prepared. Okay, so work on your assignments, and brothers, if you have questions on any part of them, just message me or email me, and if I can't answer it that way, we'll do a Zoom call or FaceTime with one-on-one. I'd be happy to help you that way. Don't feel like I'm too busy. Okay, I want to help any way I can. In fact, in the next couple of weeks, I'm going to be transitioning to full-time training. So right now I'm part-time pastor at my church, but I'm going to move out of that role so that I can dedicate myself full-time to training. So I'll have more time to be able to help you guys in the next few weeks, after the next couple of weeks. So please contact me, and if you have any questions. Okay.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Pastor Tim.
Thank you.
So
Thank
much.
you so much.
All right. Jose, you've got a whole bee's nest in your house.
No.
Wrong mic. See, wrong headset.
Yeah, the headset's a lot of feedback. Oh man.
Same one.
All right. Hey everybody. Let me ask brother Narelle, can you close us in prayer?
Yes.
Thank you.
Let's pray.